Good afternoon, everyone. If you could please take your seat. We do need to start on time. Before I introduce the chairs of this plenary session, I would like to remind members of PCST, and there are currently 798 members of PCST, that you can vote for new members of the committee. Log on to your membership and do your voting. Voting will be closing on Friday morning, so make sure that you vote for new members of the committee. The second thing I wanted to say is that there are visual posters and displays downstairs. Please make sure to have a look at them. There'll be a QR code around the place, I hope. And you can use that code to vote for the poster that you think is best. The best poster gets free registration for Aberdeen 2025. There are also 3 parallel sessions where those visual presentations will be verbally presented. The first one this afternoon at 3:15. And tomorrow at 3:15, and then Friday at 2:15, and they're all in the Van Buningen room. And you can vote for the best presented best presented display presentation. And the best presentation will also gain free registration for Aberdeen 2025. So make sure to look at the visual posters. Make sure to attend the visual presentations, vote for your favourite poster, and vote for the best presentation that you see in a visual talk. However, I would now like to hand over the stage to our 2 co-chairs this afternoon, Fabian Medvecchi from the University of Otago and Mohammed El-Sanabati, who is currently based in Belgium but is from Egypt and a member of the Scientific Committee. Over to you too. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a lovely lunch and enjoy your first day here at PCST Conference 2023 in Rotterdam. So after having a good lunch, there's only one thing that we need to discuss really, because it really matters: ethics. So today we are going to have a lovely discussions with our panelists here about the ethics of making decisions for science communication in our diverse world. Nowadays, we live in increasingly difficult decisions. As science communicators, science journalists, practitioners, and researchers, we have to deal with a lot of stuff like misinformation, how to communicate with a diverse and also polarized audiences, navigating the changing rules in our fast-moving media landscape. So we always stop and ask ourselves a question: how can we deal with this ethically, to act ethically as a science communicators? That's what we are going to explore today with our lovely panelists. Fabian, the floor is yours.
That's easy. It's starting well, isn't it? So before I introduce our 2 speakers, I'm just going to say something about how this session is going to run. Unlike most plenary talks, there's going to be no presentations as such. This is going to be purely a discussion, and really we're going to run through questions or scenarios where there are ethical or complicated decisions to be made. And what we want to hear from our speakers is, how do you think through those questions? How do you come to the decisions you make about how you're going to communicate in a specific context? What goes through your mind? What's the thinking process that guides your thinking when you make ethical decisions? And we're not going to assume that there is a right or wrong way. We just want to hear really how you go through this decision-making process. Now, our 2 speakers have far too big and too impressive a biography for me to say too much about them. So I'm just going to say a few very brief words before they introduce themselves. Firstly, we have Dr. Margaret Kaseje, who's a professor and director of research programs in Tropical Institute of Community Health in Development in Kenya. You've published so much, you've done so much. I'm not even going to start by saying what you've done. I'll let you explain more later. But you've worked certainly with a number of local communities and many things and many other groups. And after we hear from you, we'll hear from Aleda Rueda, who's an award-winning journalist in Mexico and again has an incredibly impressive background. So can you tell me both a little bit about who you are, what you find important about science communication in your world, and what you find inspiring?
Thank you, Fabian. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you'll find this session useful. I work in a situation where people are vulnerable: women, children, infants, adolescents, and they're all going through health issues. I do research, and my challenge or my dilemma sometimes is, how do I communicate my research findings to such a population so that they can take active action and improve their health? It's not easy. And of course, coupled with that is that some of the research is in the English language or in other languages, and I have to translate concepts into the local setting. So that's a challenge. I publish, yes, I do research. I try to engage the policymakers to be part of the decisions that have to be made. And I think the COVID-19 was a really graphic example of all the issues that come in science communication, and I'll talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm here because I do have two jobs. I work as a science communicator in a research center, Complexity Science Center at the University of Mexico. And I also work as a journalist, as a freelance journalist. So a lot of I care about is how to combine these two activities in a country where you can't survive from science journalism only. So this changing role made me think a lot in my own role as a science communicator and also as a science journalist, because most of the time I guess that there are a lot of decisions, ethical decisions, that I have to make and are, not up of me, like I depend on what institution wants to say in one side. And in the other side, in the media, it's not my case because I work for international media, but I can see a lot of my colleagues dealing with a lot of pressures that go beyond independent and critical journalism and sometimes go against it, against science journalism. So the most I care about is, how to convince authorities and institutions that there are critical questions that we have to make to science, to scientists, to the institutions that need to be made. How to tell them that my job is not only to tell the good part of the story or the good part of science, but also to put it in context, to compare with other sources, to really explain the scientific issues and not only to tell about what the authority wants to say or the institution is interested in saying. And in the other hand, in the media, I'm very concerned about how precarized that job is. If, for instance, if I wanted to quit my job as a journalist in the university, I hardly could survive as a journalist. And I'm a privilege because I work for international media, but I see a lot of my colleagues who work for local media or national media whose salaries are around $300 per month. And that, it's a really big effort to work as a science journalist. So those are part of my concerns. I also have another job as a teacher, so I teach science journalism. I work for the Mexican Network of Science Journalists, which is an association that seeks to improve science journalism in Mexico, in the region too, and to improve, to help new generations of science journalists to start a career in science journalism. And one of my concerns there is how can we really help them? What kind of work opportunities can we offer them? And I frequently think that their freedom, their independence, their ethical decisions are very limited. And even if they want to become science communicators or science journalists, they are, like part of a system that there always tells them that no matter how hard they try, they won't be able to respond to the public interest, and they will have to look for opportunities outside the country. So those are the things I'm very concerned about. So I'm here because I want to know solutions, and I want to, to change that situation. But I think it's hard, and we need really to give a thought of that.
I think that's why we are here today, to give it a thought, because I believe that everyone in this room on daily basis, they face ethical challenges about what they are doing as a researchers and the practitioners. So my first question will be to you, Margaret, about in your day-to-day job, just a list of the ethical challenges that you may face. A quick list.
Quick list. Challenges, yes. I think one of the challenges is, as a researcher, I've come up with results which I know, I believe are correct. How do I get the decision maker to accept that scientific information for decision making? Because it may go against what they are proposing as a politician. So sometimes I find myself in the middle. I know what the politician wants the support of the people. I know what science says that should guide what health actions are being taken, and the two are in conflict. What do I do? I think that's one of the challenges that comes in. Another one is cultural context. I work with rural communities that are very embedded in their cultural practices and beliefs. And sometimes to take them out of that, for them to accept so-called scientific knowledge can be quite a challenge. More so if I know that what they're doing is really not harmful. For instance, they're treating their children with herbal, bathing them in herbal medicine, which does not do any harm. But on the other hand, if they're not taking their children to the hospital for treatment, that's going to be harmful. Yet the two are linked. For them, bathing the baby is a treatment. For me, it's nothing, it's neither harmful nor useful. So that's a conflict. Do I go with my people who believe in this cultural practice, or do I go with the health workers who are really insisting that children should be vaccinated, should be immunized, so that you do not increase the risk for other children or the population? So as a scientist, I sometimes am at loggerheads on which side should I be. There's the emotional side that sides with my people. There's the cerebral scientific side that says this is what should be done. Then there's, of course, the gender issues. I sometimes find myself in situations where society says I shouldn't say much. I should just listen and accept what is being said. But part of me is saying this is not fair. Just because I'm a woman, why aren't you listening to me? I'm saying something that is useful. And they're saying, you're a woman, keep quiet, we make the decisions. So sometimes that is also a challenge in my situation. Of course, the language that I mentioned, a lot of the scientific concepts and so on are in the English language. Translating them to the local language sometimes doesn't come across quite well. I know during the COVID, I had an interaction with the community members, and we were trying to explain what COVID was. And one community member, a male, apologies to all the males here, stood up and said, I know what this woman is doing in our society. This woman is going to destroy us. So the woman, it was COVID, had been identified as a woman. I kept quiet, and for the sake of getting the community to move, to take action, wearing masks, distancing, and so on, I had to go along with COVID, who is a woman who is disrupting the society. So those are some of the issues that come up in my situation as a scientist, but working in context.
I think this is really interesting because also you showed how these challenges can be interconnected to each other. So when a language express or describe virus as a woman, that means that, okay, there is deep gender issues happening there. But of course you have to respect also the culture, how to deal with that in a sensitive way. So now, Aleda, what are your day-to-day challenges that you face, ethical challenges?
Well, I can make a list of ethical challenges, but I didn't want to focus on my own. So what I did, because these two very kind guys sent me the questions beforehand because I needed to get a little bit prepared, I asked some of my colleagues, my science journalist colleagues who work in Mexico and who face the range of ethical challenges, and that really can give us a big picture of what they're saying. So I asked them to complete the sentence, I frequently question my ethics when. So this is a list made collectively. I frequently question my ethics when the information I choose for a story makes people assume things that I'm not sure about. Is it my fault or is it just unavoidable? I frequently question my ethics when a certain company or even university or research institution pays for advertising in the media I work for. And my editors ask me to do an advertised article, not to lie, but to tell only the good part of the story. If I do it, I won't be doing I won't be doing journalism, I won't be doing my job. But if I don't do it, I will lose my job. What should I do? I frequently question my ethics when my media, which is a public television channel, takes information that is critical to the government from my scripts because they say we are paid by the government. I have seen colleagues who refuse to make these changes and were fired or suffer reprisals in the media. I don't want that for me. I frequently question my ethics when my sources, especially from the scientific community and government, demand that I send them my questions and my article before it is published. If I don't get the interview. There are times that I have a plan B, but there are times that when I really have to talk to those people. Am I a bad journalist because I give in to their pressure? I frequently question my ethics when I cover environmental issues. The more I learn and train myself, the more I question if I'm doing it right, especially dealing with different social groups. I question myself every time I talk to marginalized people to avoid invisibilize, re-victimize, and exclude them. This is a person who has her own media. I frequently question my ethics when I need to talk about money and when I think how to put together a business model with free journalism without jeopardizing independence, credibility, or public trust. I feel that talking about money is bad, although it is not, and that generates a lot of ethical conflict in me because I don't know how to handle it. This is someone who works in a university. I frequently question my ethics when I don't make critical questions to the scientists of my institution or during the seminars. No one has ever told me you can't ask questions, but I don't do it. I think, and sometimes they make me feel they are silly, so I just don't do it. I frequently question my ethics when I integrate the voices of certain people, especially the voices of people from rural communities or indigenous groups. I question whether am I including their perspective in a way that truly represents what they feel, what they think, what they want about the issues that affect them. Sometimes I feel that because of the lack of space I have to write, I can't give a full picture of what they are telling me. And that makes me feel and question whether I'm including their voice for a journalistic purpose or if I am doing it just to fulfill my inclusion quota. And the last one is a former journalist working for a marketing enterprise right now. I frequently question my ethics when I tell my clients what they should do or not to do to have public trust or public acceptance. Sometimes I wonder if I am betraying people just so that companies, which are my clients, can sell their products or promote their campaigns. So all these challenges made me think there are like big issues, to think about. And I also think that there are like two types of ethical decisions. One box, maybe the ones that science communicators can control, can really manage, and others that don't depend on them, that are more depending on the media or the economical model, the political pressures, and a system that see journalism exclusively as a product or a money-making business and not as a public service. So I think that all our ethical concerns should always be analyzed by this filter. Is up to me or not?
Well, thank you very much, both of you. I mean, I think one of the big questions is, what is it that what you're reflecting is what is it that you as a communicator can actually do, and what is systemic in a broader way. So what I want to do now is just ask you kind of a hypothetical case and see what you would think through this. So let's imagine, and I'll start with you, Margaret. Let's imagine you're working with a local community on a health campaign about a specific condition. And for this condition, there is both a traditional form of medical treatment, or traditional treatment, and there's a modern Western science treatment. And I guess I'm wondering, who do you engage in the discussion about how we do this? Whose voice do you make come forward? How do you decide who you include in the discussion you have around this medical treatment or this condition? Easy question.
Very easy. In a rural setting, in my context, I would first of all go to the household level and I would talk to the mother-in-law. Because decisions about the health of a household are really dictated by the matriarch in that family, and usually it's the mother-in-law. And I would try to convince her, if I was convinced about this treatment, I would also try to convince her that she probably should allow the household or her daughter-in-law or her grandchildren, whoever, to take up the treatment. Aside from that, I think I would need to go to the health workers, the service providers. What we find in our situation is that the providers are pretty rude to rural people. When they come to the facility, they're looked at in disdain, as if they don't know anything. They've come late. Where were you? Why didn't you come earlier? Don't you know this is a problem? And so on and so on. So I would try to bring a mindset, a change of mindset among the health providers who are, to be fair to them, they're not motivated, they're few, they're not salaried well, they're exhausted, everybody wants their attention. So I would try to get them on board as well about this famous new treatment.
Fascinating. I mean, out of interest, would treatment, would it be this, or is it usually you would go towards the mother or mother-in-law or whatever else, or would you sometimes go to the males? Is there different domains where you would go differently?
I think because it's new, anything new has challenges, and to get buy-in as early as possible, I would start there. But eventually I'll have to talk to the man of the house. But that will come later. This brings to fore the sort of challenges or bottlenecks that comes when a new treatment is on board, or a new procedure or a new way of doing things is needed. And there are layers, and one needs to know where's the core to start off with a layer, with a communication. So for instance, going back to COVID, I had to deal with the men because they had already made up their mind that this was a gender issue. So slowly brought them on board and yes, agreed with them, and then said, okay, what do we do about this woman? And we agreed that eventually, yes, we had to do protective measures and so on and so on and so on. So sometimes going along with the grain. I know as a scientist, I don't agree all the way, but I have to at times take a middle ground and get both sides together so that we have the action that is really going to produce results. I'd like to know what the new treatment is. But anyway.
That's a secret.
So another ethical question could be like, as a journalist, if you are going to report about this case, this kind of story of prevalence of certain disease where you have like this Western medication, as a science journalist, you will most probably tend to cover this. But you find also that the company behind this drug, let's say they are problematic, can fall under like big bad pharma. How do you deal with that? What are you going to report on? What are you not going to report on?
So for me as a science journalist, the first thing I would do is to do some research in order to decide if there is a potential story, if there's a relevant angle for people. So I would do my research, of course, following the journalistic questions, you know, like what is this health campaign about, who is paying for it, what is the objective, why is it being applied in this community, what is the objective of that. And then I think it's very important to do some research about this company, and if it's problematic, like what kind of problems it has. Because, you know, instead of assuming it, I would prefer to explore what is the exact problem. It reminds me some of the issues that I faced during COVID as a journalist. I saw a lot of, you know, misinformation and disinformation and this kind of conspiracy theories. But some of them were just, you know, like lacking of basic scientific content or information. For instance, there were a lot of articles that were saying, for example, that the companies were testing these vaccines, were applying these vaccines without testing them in the Mexican population. Or if they did a trial, they didn't communicate to people if they were receiving the vaccine or the placebo. So I had to make a lot of articles. I work for as a fact checker in a media that is based in Peru. The name is Salud con Lupa. And I had to explain a lot of, you know, how protocols work, how really, you know, people don't need to know if they're receiving vaccines or placebos, because that's how the experiment works, or that if it's a emergency use authorization, they don't need to be tested in every single country. So I guess that there are a lot of those kind of issues that maybe instead of assuming that the company is just, you know, bad for everybody, it would imply to do a big research about what is it about. The second thing is, of course, speaking to communities, but here I would need to be very careful about my own security. In Mexico, we have a huge problem. A lot of the regions are controlled by drug dealers or people who work for drug dealers. And I have seen a lot of my colleagues who were trying to reach some communities, in rural communities, in indigenous communities, that were kidnapped or were robbed. This is happening. I mean, this is the reality. So if I don't have, you know, a minimum security requirements, I would rather not to go, and trying to reach them by other media. But if I have certain security requirements, I would definitely talk to the leaders, but not only the leaders, because I have this experience working with some in a mentoring problem with health journalists and science journalists who were trying to explore how big was the acceptance from old people in several indigenous groups in the south of Mexico, in the state of Chiapas. And they discovered that most of the leaders, they didn't represent the feeling of the community. So I would rather talk to women, of course, to try to understand if it's a health issue. I mean, we have to talk to women. And I would also, really get into the local knowledge to try to understand how they learned to apply it, how they deal with these health issues, how they could use local knowledge to really deal with these health issues. Maybe to talk to a social scientist, because it can give me a lot of the context to really understand how this knowledge really works.
I just have a quick question for you. So, I mean, it's fascinating you're both saying, that you would target women in your communication first in some contexts. As a journalist, how would you do that? Like, how would you specifically, in real practice, how would you target the population that you think is most important as a journalist in that setting?
For me, and the thing I have made is to team up with a female journalist who lives in that city, who really knows the community. For me, it's like, as I said, it's very dangerous to go alone and to have no assistance there. So it's it's easier to have this, diverse network of journalists, of health journalists or investigative journalists who really know the territory, who have been there, who know the traditions, the local knowledge, and to team up with them, not to try to colonize from my Mexico City vision, but to really listen and to really learn from the ones who live there and who really know how to reach those women.
And for you, Margaret?
I would use the same approach, the social networks. So for instance, in my setting, we have community health volunteers who know all their households and are the king points of community issues. So I would work through them. I wouldn't go alone and stand there and try to talk to them.
I think also what of other ethical challenges that we may face, that every one of us here may be wearing different hats. So you can be a science journalist, a corporate communication. One day you work as a researcher, one day you work as a practitioner and somewhere else. So I would like to ask you, Eleda, you mentioned that already. So now you have given us the angle of a science journalist. But then if you are working as a corporate communication officer in this big pharma company, how you are going to deal with that ethically, knowing that the drugs that you are trying to promote maybe have some problems behind it, or at least in the process of having it, or try to force it in this community?
That would be harder. I think, based in my experience as a science communicator, I think the first part of the work starts inside the institution, inside the company. So I have tried to convince them that empty messages don't have a real impact. No matter if they want to sell a product or to give a message or to have a campaign to help people, no? So I would start to really make people from the institutions or the companies to really think about how they want to impact, how they really want to be seen and perceived by communities. Because what usually happens is that a lot of communities, they see any intervention, like doctors or health assistants or whatever, as colonizers. They have lived for decades thinking that government or all, campaigns that come from different actors come from people that they don't care about them, they don't listen to them, they don't speak their language, they just don't care about their lives and about their context. So if we want to change that vision, if we don't want to replicate that message, we need to start, sending the correct message inside the institution, and maybe we can have different products and campaigns and messages. But if we are, if we feel the pressures from the companies, it will be very hard to do things differently. So I would say I first, try to educate my my bosses, if that is possible. I don't know.
So, I guess, in a way, one of the things that's come up a few times is when you have different pressures, when you have pressures as what you might want to do as a reporter, or as a worker within a community, as a communicator within a community, or practitioner within a community, and other pressures you might have from the editorial board, from funders, from government. How do you negotiate this? So let's say the government really pushes a certain view, a certain arm, and they may have whatever motivation for it that you think is not necessarily scientifically ideal, but there's always complexities in policies. How do you engage with the communication then? What do you communicate? What do you talk about? What don't you talk about? And how do you think through this process?
I think one has to be in the shoes of the other person. So for instance, if I'm talking to a politician, I need to see what their concerns are. I need to see what their pressures are. And I need to speak simple language. Politicians have no time for p-values and odds ratios and so on. Just simple messages, something that they can grab and spew back. Well, I take that back. Something that they can grab and communicate easily to their constituents. Because if it's too complicated, they get lost, and then the whole issue is lost. The whole campaign, the whole focus of what you wanted to do is lost with them. So, giving them something that they can use. And then depending on other technocrats, for instance, they'd want to know the details of how this was done and, how was it analyzed and so on and so on. And then talking to the communities, that's also a different approach, where they just want to know how is it going to affect me? How can I use that information? How easily can I use it in my own setting? So communication depends on who the audience is, as we all know, and just packaging the message in the right way. I think that's probably usually the biggest challenge. How do I get the right message in the right package for the consumer to use?
And Yolanda, how do you negotiate, for example, if you have a pressure from an editor to go a very specific way, but it's not where you would normally go or not where you would like to go? How do you negotiate that challenges? What would you personally do?
I don't know if I would negotiate a lot, because, as I said, as certain circumstances that are, very difficult and dangerous. So if I don't normally know the territory, I would rather not to go. But if I do, if I know the place and the people, I would definitely tell the editor how important it is to listen to these voices, because there is like a bias in a lot of media that they really want to, if you're talking about science, you need to interview only scientists, and only scientists from exact sciences, or I don't know how to tell them, but not even social scientists. So I think that the most diverse is the edition room, and the most different people they are listening to as editors. They would be more sensitive about how important it is to listen to these people and to really be there to know them. So I think some things are changing. There are more people from different backgrounds and also areas in Mexico, also people who have this diversity and inclusion angle of their stories, but it's not a normal thing. It costs money, and not all the media are willing to pay for it. So I guess it's going to be a very challenging issue to really make them think that this is important. I think we need more women in the rooms, in the edition rooms and the media, and not only as editors, but also people who own the media, people who really take the big decisions. And if that don't change, it's going to be more difficult, I guess.
Okay, so since we are like having a kind of hypothetical scenario to deal with different ethical challenges, and how can be our ethical points of view change a little bit with the rules that we have. But in real life, we have to deal with that in a very limited time. So my question would be to you, Margaret, about how, when you face any kind of ethical challenges, how you process through it in a very limited time. You have to take a decision. How do you deal with that?
I think my gut reaction comes into play. I have a very short time. I probably, in my subconscious, I have all these issues and challenges that I've addressed before. So I can't say exactly what I would do, but I think guided by my experience, my profession, the context which I'm operating in, I think my gut feeling would be to do what I think is the right thing at that moment. And if it's a decision to be made between science and what is out there, which is not, doesn't have a basis, I would lean towards the scientific explanation if I didn't have time to think through it.
What about you, Alida?
If it's something that will take too long, I would decide not to do it because, you know, you're working for a media that needs the information right there and very fast. And sometimes you don't have enough space, enough time. So, yes, I would say, what are the, you know, the key messages, the key ideas or information that I need to have in this article? Sometimes, and that's what I always try to do, is to include science. Because, I mean, it's like obvious, but a lot of science articles do not include science, do not explain the process of science. So I would decide to have the time to really understand and to explain this information, you know, instead of trying to reach the most important source or the government, that it will take time, and most of the time these sources won't reply my emails. So yes, I would decide something that is easy in terms of, you know, like I know that I will have it soon, but also to really include scientific explanations key for people that can understand, and also which is relevant for them. You know, it's maybe you can have the perfect science, but nobody will care. So I really need to make the point, you know, to really make science relevant, how people would care about that information. And if I can do that in 1 hour or two, it's fantastic, but it doesn't happen.
So, I mean, we've talked about some possibilities, but what we'd really like to hear is some of the situations you may have faced in your life as a science communicator, when you've thought, what do I do here? Kind of, what's the right thing for me to do here? So if some people would like to kind of volunteer, if you've got questions or suggestions about this, please come up to a microphone and suggest something. There's microphones up here on the room. So if somebody's got like a specific case that's happened to you or a situation you were in or some questions, please don't all go at once. But some of you sometimes would be wonderful. Please. So please, we invite you to come and suggest some things or ask something if you have a question. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you one more. I had this ready beforehand, you see, cunning plan. We were talking before about a few weeks ago about medical tourism, because you were saying that it happens a fair bit in Mexico. And this becomes an interesting case about what kind of medical practices or medical opportunities do you even communicate so as to discourage or encourage medical tourism? How do you go making that decision? Because medical tourism has both obviously good and bad bits. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, well, especially in the, how do you say, the frontiers? No, the borders, yes, thank you. The borders and northern of Mexico, there is happening a big issue. I think it happens in a lot of countries too, but here in the north of Mexico, there are a lot of people from especially United States, but also from Europe, who travel to Mexico because they want to have, like cheaper interventions, especially the ones related to the teeth, odontological procedures. And what is happening is that a lot of these interventions are getting more and more expensive. So the only people who come from abroad can afford them. And they're making local people to travel to other states or even other countries in Latin America to afford them, because not all of them have, social medical services for free. So it's making a great problem, to at the same time that you see doctors getting rich, because they don't live in Mexico, they live in the United States, but they have their businesses in Mexico. And at the same time, you can see, I have seen the communities, the local communities getting more and more poor, poorer. And that's why I think there are this message from governments that say, let's do this, let's open our borders to medical tourism, without thinking how really it's impacting the local people, the poorer ones that, clean the clinics or the guards at nights, they are the ones who are really suffering from not, having the ability to pay for it. So it's, I don't know if I answered your question, but it's...
You brought up some ethical issues.
Okay, it's an ethical decision to how to cover that, right?
Okay, so I think we can have some questions. Jenny, please.
Yes, Jenny Metcalf, Australia. I was interested to hear about how you prioritise science over, say, traditional or indigenous knowledge. And I'm wondering whether there's a case both in journalism and health, public health, where different forms of knowledge can come together with science, or may even be better than science in terms of providing information and advice to people. How do you integrate different knowledge, expert knowledge sources other than science?
Yes, Jenny, I think there's an opportunity for the two to come together. But the problem is that science training really separates itself from traditional knowledge, traditional culture. The average medical school, the average university curricula does not allow for integration of cultural or indigenous knowledge, which is a pity, because one can find, for instance, a bone setter from the village sometimes can do a better job than somebody in the health facility who has just graduated from medical school. So I think there's a lot more opportunity for that to happen, but unfortunately it doesn't. The two could potentially complement each other.
I'm not sure if I can do that. I mean, I have to be very, honest. I think most of the time I just quote people from science and people from communities. And the interesting thing is what happened next, when they read those articles and they discover that they are like other people thinking in a different way, but on the same issue, or trying different things to deal with the same health problem. And I think that's when a change happens, not all the time, of course, but I have had some comments about how important, is to have interviewed another person who they never in life have talked to. So maybe science journalism has this power, to put all these voices together, even if they don't talk and they don't know each other in reality. They can read themselves and learn from each other, and maybe it's a way to have this encounter, this ideas, different ideas put together in the same place.
Thank you. Go.
So hi everyone, I'm John Vianya. I'm based in Australia, originally from the Philippines. So I just have a question as well. So thanks for really raising up that, decolonization is not just people from one country going to another, but could also be potentially people from urban areas going to rural areas. So I'm just wondering, to what extent in your work do you actually encourage or emancipate local communities to first formulate public health solutions and implement them by themselves, so that you don't always have to wait for a doctor from outside to go to that area. But also in terms of journalism, that we don't have to wait for external journalists to actually go to the community, and then the community could actually tell their own stories, but also be able to appraise the science themselves and disseminate it amongst their members. Thank you.
Okay, I can comment a bit about communities' own resource people. That's a concept that we really encourage people to recognize the strengths that they have, the knowledge that they have, and that they can, in most instances, do quite a lot before they wait for the external person to come in. We try to do that, yes. About communities doing their own journalism or their own stories, something like that.
I think we're trying to decentralize science journalism. There were a time where we only had science journalists in Mexico City trying to tell the stories of all the country. But now I can say, because I know them, science journalists who live in Oaxaca, who live in the northern, south and west, we have in the association 140 science journalists. Half of them work in states, in cities different from Mexico City. But of course, they are cities, they're not the very local places. But anyway, they have different view from the stories that we have to tell. And sometimes they say, hey, people from Mexico City, come and really know and understand what the stories that we want to talk about, and let's dialogue, let's have some conversations about how being in a city, have some influences that don't have that importance when we're living and dealing with this kind of problems, very local problems that, it's a local problem, but it's a global problem, everybody can identify with that problem. So I think it's happening, we are not trying to go to the States and tell the stories, but to really listen to our colleagues that live there and can understand how they are understanding that situation and to tell the stories about it. It's not happening like so frequently, but at least we have those journalists there working on their own stories.
Monica Felio-Moher from Puerto Rico. I'll share a short example and then a question, or I guess I'll frame it with the question. How do you deal with mistakes or ethical misjudgments? How do you correct those? I've been working with the deaf community in Puerto Rico, and as a hearing person, I made a lot of assumptions, like captioning videos would be enough, and I've learned that because of systemic failures in education and other spaces, some deaf people don't have the proficiency to read captions in Spanish, and so my team and I have had to correct for that, educating ourselves, adjusting our budget, doing different things. So I was wondering, in your own spaces, how do you deal with those mistakes and misjudgments, ethical misjudgments?
Yes, sometimes it's a case of unconscious bias. I remember an instance where we had, it was a seminar or a workshop, and we really didn't think about people who would come to the workshop in wheelchairs until one participant struggled and reached the stage because there was no way there were no pavements or whatever. And sometimes one has to be confronted with such issues to be aware that they need to be addressed. And I think that's where journalism can come in, to point out some of these issues that are unjust, are unethical, need to be addressed. And I think that's why journalists have really got a big role for all of us, because sometimes we may just not be even conscious about these biases.
Yes, I'm not sure how to answer that question, because I'm not sure that I have lived some of those situations. I guess some examples that are maybe related to it is, how editors, choose pictures to your articles, or how they can change the titles or some information just because it fits with what they think and what they want to publish, and not to be really, committed with the work that you did. So when that happened, I think that what I have made is just to tell them, this is not what I wanted to say, and let's make a difference, because maybe other media won't do it, won't have that reflection, they won't discuss it. So if you notice that, you have to make that point inside your team, because maybe it can make a difference, and to really, do things better.
I think I have just one more question to ask you about, sometimes after we do our communication or journalism, we discover that we have mistaken, we made something wrong. And I think we are ethically committed to admit that and try to correct that. But usually the mechanisms to do so are not clear. So how do you deal with that? If you found that you did something wrong about your reporting, and for Margaret about your communication, how do you deal with that?
Sometimes it's easier to say, I'm sorry, I did a mistake. I mean, not for me only, but my editor, I really made a mistake. And sometimes to really, to be honest about it, and to really think how to avoid it, to make the same mistake the next time, would be the best learning that you can have. You as a team, you as an editor, and you as a network. I think that we have to share our mistakes. We have a lot of sessions where do really talk about it. It's like a therapy when we share our mistakes and said, okay, this happened to me. This can help you to avoid you to get the same mistake. So it's just, sometimes the most important thing is you really realize that you have a mistake, because sometimes you just did it, and after 10 years you realize that you made a mistake. So as soon as you are, sensitive and conscious that you don't know everything, you need to be very brave enough to say that you make mistakes and help each other to not repeat it again.
Yes, I'm Catherine from Norway, a country where we like to think that gender is not an issue anymore. But of course, gender is always an issue still, and also in communication. So in what way would you think, you two wonderful ladies up there, how would your work be harder or easier if you were male?
How would it be harder or easier if you were male? How would it be different?
I imagine my work would be easier if I was a male.
Actually, would it be easier to talk to the women if you were male?
Yes, I would just commandeer and tell them.
Are you sure?
Listen to me. But seriously, I think we just have to understand our cultures and our context, and at the end of the day, whether one is a male or a female, it's just knowing how to talk to the people, how to communicate, you know. I think that's the crux of it, simply put.
I think it would change a lot, you know, inside my, I mean, not now in my career, but when I was younger, I would feel more confident. I would feel more secure about what I know, and I would, you know, raise my voice and to be really listened, because, you know, women and, you know, if you're young, it's very frequently that you feel not enough to do whatever you decide to do. In fact, this moment for me is like a big issue, you know. I'm feeling not very confident about what I know, and I'm a girl with 20 years of experience in my country, so I think things would be, you know, easier, because I would think that I would be more listened to, you know, like taken in account, to propose stories, to give my opinions, to say I want to do this because I don't want to, or because it's not correct. And when I was younger, I would fear, you know, everything. You know, I could be very not sure about what I knew. So I can say that now it's different. I'm more confident, but it was not very easy. So, yeah. I'm proud I'm a woman.
All I can say is thank you so much to both of you. There is one more. Well, we'll take one more. No, we have no time left.
No
I'm
time.
sorry. We've just been overridden. So all I can say is thank you so much to both of you for being inspiring and amazing. And thank you.